Alright, so I'm going to be doing another comic review, and this is another book from Chris. Thank you once again, Chris, aka the Mount Vernon Kid. He sends me these indie haul. He's been sending me this indie haul, which is coming in increments. I think I used that word right. It's been a long day for me. Anyway, so the next book I'm going to review is Hound. This is from Mad Cave Comics, and I don't think I've read a lot of Mad Cave, honestly. I think this is my first foray. I could be wrong. But Hound is a horror graphic novel that is a World War I horror story. Now, for those who are wondering, I initially thought that this was meant to be a bit of. Let me give you a little bit of history, real fast, as to what I thought this was going to be. See, I thought this was going to be about the Hound of Mons. For those who don't know what the Hound of Mons is, the Hound of Mons is basically a World War I legend of this dog or wolf or werewolf, it kind of varies between stories, of this beast just kind of roving around in the no man's land between the trenches, eating dead and dying soldiers. And a lot of the story is interesting. Now, I will probably say that what it probably was that someone saw like a dog, like a big dog eating a dead person, and it just kind of ran with it. There have been a lot of other variations where like the legend said it was like a German scientist who put a mentally unstable criminal soldier's brain in a wolf's body and set them loose on British and French soldiers. That's the this is the craziest. Now, this doesn't follow that, but it does look like it does take inspiration from it at the very least. So what is this book about? Like I said, it's a World War I horror book, which I kind of find interesting. That I find it fascinating that when we do World War II horror stories, they're usually like shocking, like kind of like a Tales from the Crypt, like they're so overblown and insane, and like they're action horror stories. Whereas World War I horror stories, I've kind of come to realize that World War II ones are meant to be like I'm not saying everyone, but vast majority of the World War II horror, like period piece horror stories you see, are usually like kitschy and like, yeah, it's supposed to be like like it's never outright scary. But now that you've seen this, like now I've been seeing like this slew of World War I horror book, like horror stories and video games and whatnot, and for the most part, they're way more terrifying. They're way more scarier and really play into that the shock and terror that these these men who had never experienced combat, and experienced just absolute horror in its own right. So I find there's an interesting dichotomy for when people do horror stories in the world wars. And that kind of plays into this. So what is the comic about? The comic follows a man named William Barrow, who has been assigned to a new group called the Hounds. The Hounds are a group of British soldiers who deal with chemical warfare. And essentially what it is that Barrow learns that these men have been de-evolving and are almost wolf-like in nature. And now Barrow, in order to save himself and his humanity, he has to fight for his life in the desolation of World War I. This is a pretty brutal book, I'm not gonna lie. I don't know how much I can show you of this, but like it's a pretty brutal book. It really showcases just there's no like the bright light like in the flashbacks and the epilogues, like the bright sunlight even then just feels kind of like oof. It's paired with this level of solemnness to it. Whereas in the World War I, like the whole setting of World War I, it's all just dark and dingy. There's no sunlight. It's gray at most during the day, and everything's dirty or destroyed and dilapidated. It really showcases that World War I was just a horror show in its own. Not to discredit World War II, but World War I was just ugly in its own right. So Barrow's a pretty interesting character. He's already been in this war for about 3 years, I believe, he says. And he's already felt like his soul has been taken from him from this, but now his humanity's on the line because the Hounds are monstrous in their own right. Like, they're straight up just eating people. And it's kind of implied that they are like werewolf-like, but it also says like the gas also made them like this, made them like animals. Throughout the story, Barrow has to go through his own trials, and he has to make choices that will condemn his soul. The book is violent and really showcases this like great level of gore and meaning to it. This book is not a fun, like, let's have a fun romp. This is, no, these may be werewolf-like monsters, but like the real monster is the war itself and what it does to people. Barrow is a pretty fascinating character. There is a moment in here where he has to make a life or death choice, and no doubt it's going to stick with him. The book is very short, though. I will admit, I've read this in like 30 minutes. That's why I decided to do this review, was because I was like, well, I finished it. Might as well add it, do a review of it too. The artwork is very reminiscent of like Tales from the Crypt or like Vault of Horror kind of books. I love the shading, I love the coloring. Again, everything is just dark and dingy, and yeah. I don't know how much I can show you of the book because every one of these are like gory and graphic, and yeah. But anyway, so do I recommend Hound? Yeah, I recommend it. If you want to read have a quick read of a cool horror story and check out more World War I stuff, here you go. I really enjoyed it. It was a quick, fast read. I recommend it. So there you go, guys. That is my review of Hound. Again, I thought it'd be about the Hound of Mons, but I'm pleasantly surprised by this. But anyway, thank you once again, Chris, and hope you all enjoyed this review. I'm Mr. Multiverse. I'll see you next time in the Multiverse.